Hello and welcome. And just as you take in the film, the wonderful film that you just watched, I'd like to welcome you to this Doc NYC Spring Showcase. My name is Bedatri Chowdhury, and I am an associate features programmer for Doc NYC. And today I'm very starstruck, and I have with me here Amy Poehler, Justin Wilkes, Robert Martinez, and Jeanne Elfant Festa. And they are the filmmaking team behind the fantastic documentary you just watched. Amy is both the director and producer. Justin and Jeanne are producers as well. And Robert is the man behind the fantastic editing of the film. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for sharing this wonderful gift of a film with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Bedatri.
Yeah, and Amy, if I can just start with you, when I heard this film is premiering at Sundance, and and everyone's like, oh, Amy Poehler made a film, a documentary, that was the big thing. And then it was like, it's about Lucy and Desi, people were just like surprise after surprise after surprise. So if you could just start with that, how did you get around to making this film?
Sure. Yeah. This is my third feature that I've made in my first documentary, and it came very organically. Morgan Sackett, who was a producer on some films that I've worked on and who worked with me at Parks and Rec, had heard that this project was happening and said, maybe you should meet. And at the same time, I think, and I'll let Jeannie tell that story, but I think at the same time, Whitehorse and Imagine were trying to figure out the best way to tell this story. And so we all met very early on to talk about, is there a way in? Could I be a value to the project? And could I see a way in? And so to be honest, it still remains kind of a surprise to me that it all happened the way it did, which I sometimes think is the best kinds of projects. I think everyone was just creatively speaking the same vocabulary, very excited about a way to approach Lucy and Desi together. And I really like challenges. I like trying things differently each time I'm directing. I was really excited about taking a pass at the form. I have high respect for the documentaries as a form and the people that work in them. So it was a really nice, slow, organic process, like most things that took years and years to get done.
And Jeanne and Justin, apart from the fact that how or not do you say no to Amy Poehler, why did you think she was the best person to make the film?
Well, she was the only person on our list, so luckily she said yes. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had a movie.
Exactly. She was the only person on our list because there's a lot. I mean, there was a lot of parallels, really. Amy ran a successful, massive show, Parks and Rec. She wrote, directed that show then. She raised a family through that show. So there was a lot of kind of similarities and parallels to Lucy. So I think it was very organic. And we were just blessed that she came aboard.
Justin, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's exactly right. And on that very first conversation that we had all together, it was clear that Amy knew more than the average person about the story of Lucy and Desi, and was really up for I'll say challenge, because in this case, while it's a great idea on paper, to actually make something like this, which is so archival heavy, and taking that plunge into how do you do something that might even be different than every version of the story that you've heard before. So she was very brave to take on this particular directorial assignment, but we're thrilled that she did.
Yeah, and that brings me to you, Robert. Before stepping into this project, it's like this huge thing, and then of course, like Justin says, there's so much archival here, and of course, you're also there's new material. So, as an editor, what were your first thoughts when you were brought on the project?
Yeah, I think one of our main goals, because they are so well known and they are so well documented, was to try to achieve a sort of intimate tone with them. So the estate was really, they really helped us out to try and find some things that felt like they were either never before seen or felt very special. The audio tapes that they happened upon were a big revelation for us. That enabled us to be able to do things that other films haven't been able to do, which is to tell the story in their own words. And I think that became a sort of journey of discovery for us. We were hearing things that were fulfilling our narrative, that were bucking against our narrative and saying, no, that's not right. And it became a sort of, we were learning about them on the fly, really. We had some preconceived notions of what we thought what the story was. And it was up to us to just kind of listen to them and let them tell their story.
Yeah. One of my most, fondest memories is Robert and I going over all this footage and trying to figure out what kind of narrators, are they reliable narrators, Lucy and Desi, about their own lives? Most people aren't, especially during that time. And what we found is, we'd have to trade off this feeling of wanting them to feel around and alive, because it was really important to kind of bring them back to life. And there's nothing better than hearing from someone if you want that to happen. But we then also had to really figure out and play into and lean into the things that weren't said, because I think we're now savvy enough to know when we hear someone explain something, the stuff that they leave out or they leave behind or they try to joke around, that also tells you something about their story too. So I know that, we were always talking about figuring out who is telling this story, how are they telling it, what was their version of it, because we're talking about two very, very famous, watched, photographed, recorded people who were also people with their own thoughts and feelings and point of views about their own lives.
Yeah,
and Robert had a beautiful insight. We were talking before, that when I was just gestating this idea, I had conversations with Robert going, what do you think of this? And we were coming off of the Bee Gees film at White Horse Pictures, and Robert was one that shined a light on Desi's life. And his journey, and being a refugee, and what he had to deal with being a brown man in the world then, and sadly a lot of things. It's not like a lot of stuff has changed, sadly. So we're getting there, but the challenges that Desi faced were tremendous.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to the next question: is, for any woman in comedy, like Lucy is like the foremother, like she's the godmother, right? So, and like speaking of this personal connection, that, it's not just any filmmaker making this film, but Amy, you, and so what do you think your vantage point as a comedic actress, how did it help you make this film?
Well, I think sometimes that can help you and hinder you. It really depends. Yeah. Sometimes it's a little inside baseball, and you can, sometimes a lot of films about comedians are there to show how deep and serious they actually are, and they don't enjoy how funny they are. What I think I relate to or just connect to just purely as a fan is I just think that Lucy's work was so important to her, and you can see it in the way she treats it. So she had great respect for her work and her training and her craft, and she worked really hard. And when she gets in front of the camera, there's something about Lucy. We used to always say this at SNL, like, you really want to be a performer that no one is worried about. You really don't want to be worried for a performer. And Lucy had this confidence. You would relax. Even when she was doing crazy stuff and on top of a building and hanging off a flagpole, like, she always had a control of her craft. She really knew what she was doing. And that's why it's so amazing to watch her still, is how good she is. It's just simply that, how good she is, how funny she is, how funny the show remains. So I think just as a young person, as a fan, I just saw that right away, that, oh, she's very, very good. And to be very honest, I didn't necessarily think of her as female comedian. I thought of her as funny. Yeah. And I think what we talk a lot about that with Desi too. I think young Latin boys and girls, especially, Cuban Americans, saw Desi and they saw this person being represented, and they saw, oh, he's funny, he's smart, he's in charge. representation is a weird thing. If it's done right, you're not really even aware that it's happening because you're enjoying the art and the comedy or whatever is the person is delivering. So Lucy and Desi did that for so many people. And so of course my little girl brain, that was seared into it for sure. But yeah, I think it's just, she's so funny and so good. It's as simple as that.
I think just to add to that, it's the reason why, you know, this show was able to cut through when it did, because again, on paper, for a white female and a Latin male to be married on television had never happened before. And it was just because the show was just so funny that everybody was able to really look past that. It wasn't an issue. And that's something that obviously comes through in the storytelling, but that was something that I didn't fully comprehend or appreciate, I think, going into it. And then really understanding the circumstances around what they were trying to do and how almost Herculean it was. And yet, like Amy said, it's just because, no, not just because, one of the main reasons that everyone accepted it was undeniably amazing. And they were able to go along and do that.
I mean, I maybe I can speak for some of the people on the panel. Robert, you're a baby, so you're younger, but you know, I was a 70s kid. So I was like, you know, Norman Lear was the shows that I grew up with, which tackled race and sexuality and women's issues and all this stuff. I was like right in the forefront. And it took a minute to really put into context how incredibly groundbreaking it was that Lucy and Desi were married. And there was no discussion about it, and America accepted it. And the great Norman Lear in our documentary speaks to that and says, it says something about us that we really quickly as an American audience loved them, accepted them as a couple. And in general, the idea that you don't need to underestimate the emotional intelligence or the width or breadth of what an audience can handle or is ready for.
And Jeanne, thank you for sharing the insights Robert brought to the process. And I think, you know, like Amy said, representation is both a good and a sticky thing. So Robert, what was it like for you? If you could speak a little to that experience about, working on this film.
Yeah, for representation, I mean, it's always a special thing when we can tell our own stories. There's a cultural aspect that I'm not even aware of that's happening and that I'm sort of tapping into with the Latin story. And it's something that, you know, people, especially in a documentary sphere, I think there's a need for that deeper, one layer, deeper type of conversation we're having here. For Desi specifically, I mean, the idea of representation it's complicated. It's not only seeing yourself on screen and seeing someone being able to access that, but it's a diversity of talent and a diversity of thought. And that speaks to the longevity of the show, because they were doing things and thinking in ways that other people weren't, because there was this echo chamber of thought and innovation. So, you know, that's kind of an American thing, right? The idea of having this well-rounded, multicultural environment. And that's a reason why America has been able to create so many special things. When you bring different people into the conversation, it's going to create something really special.
Yeah, and speaking to how well this show ages, I grew up in 90s in India and we were watching reruns of this show. And I was laughing, my parents were laughing, everyone who's watching were laughing, even though we may have been a little lost to the cultural context of, or the immediate cultural context, obviously, to this show. But it was just to attest to the fact that it was universally funny and just so much joy giving. So, and that's what I remembered when I watched the film.
Well, I think the common denominators are that rupture and repair. You know, we talked a lot about just like, you know, you start something, there's a problem. And then in the end, there's unconditional love. And every episode ended like that and made you feel really good. So, and the other thing, just playing off of, or speaking off of what Robert said, what was also cool about the show and noted was the only person that could make fun of Desi's accent was Lucy. And she loved him and loved the accent. So, but she would make fun of it, you know? And I thought that was interesting and a discovery for myself anyway.
Yeah, and I was in, the film is called Lucy and Daisy. Did you always set out making a film about both of them? Or did you start out making
I think their relationship has this really, in the process of putting it together, and Robert and I talked about it a lot, but they have this kind of 3-act structure in their lives. Their relationship proves to be a spine in which so much can be hung on, and it is a really amazing study on what is a successful partnership. And we used that relationship in order to show what they succeeded in, how they, had their own lives and were making, frankly, their own kind of, music. And they met together and made kind of the best music of their lives together. So it was always meant to be that way, especially and most importantly, because Lucy Arnaz-Luckenbill, who is an incredible collaborator and producer on this and who helped us dearly, did feel, deeply that Desi's story was really untold, and had not yet kind of frankly been given, he wasn't given the amount of time he deserved for what he accomplished and what he innovated. So that became this really interesting way in which how can we use their partnership as a way to tell their story? And I mean, I think that what they both did up until the very ends of their lives is really see in each other this, as Robert was saying, like a very American spirit. It's a very American story about two outsiders who found their way into a room that they usually weren't invited to be in. So yeah, since the beginning was always that idea.
And you really wouldn't have one without the other. Lucy would have maybe gone on to have her B-movie career, and Desi may have stayed with music and other things, but it was the intersection of the two of them that created this great art. And the thing that I also, again, knew very little about going into it was what an incredible producer Desi was. That is something that I don't think he also gets enough credit for. It comes out in the movie, where as gifted as a performer that he was in some ways even more gifted as a producer. And you look at so many shows that he had a hand in helping to foster, helping to create, helping to nurture, and the production infrastructure and really revolutionary production infrastructure around that. He transformed the television industry. Mm-hmm. And then just as he's sort of at his pinnacle, Lucy comes in, and then she becomes the president of the whole operation when he is having health issues. So then she sort of takes it as a female executive in Hollywood, which again, there was no one else doing that at that point. It was a very male dominant, still is in a lot of ways, but very male dominated time in Hollywood in the 1950s and 60s. So that's pretty remarkable too.
We talked a lot about how there's a million ways to tell the story. You could tell the story through the lens of gender, because it's really fascinating how Lucy and Desi had a certain, frankly, fluidity and how they tackled life, how they used the masculine and feminine in different ways, and how they were also, of course, a product of their time of the 1950s. You can tell this story through the time of like America as, politics in America and what it meant to be an American. We touch a little bit about on it in the film about, un-American activities and the fear that was going through the country at that time. You could also tell the story of two people who had major trauma in the beginning of their lives and decided that they were going to run as far away from that as they could. And the way they ran away was hard work. There's like a lot of lenses to tell the story, plus all the comedy, all the scenes, all the shows. There was so much. I mean, Robert did an amazing job it was just brutal to figure out what to keep and what not to keep. And there's so much more to tell, which is why we're announcing the television show. No, I'm just kidding. We'd like
the Broadway musical and the 4 books.
Yeah, there's so much more left to tell, for sure.
So Robert, my next question is to you. So, how do you, there's so much material, archival, new footage, that there's so much in this film, and there was so much that was available to you. So how do you go about editing this mammoth of a film in a way that, tells a cohesive and comprehensive story?
Yeah, that's kind of, as an editor, you're kind of assuming that you're going to have to cut out something you love, at every stop. So I think for this, once you figure out the core kind of idea, which was the love story, you can quickly see like, oh, I just like this because it's funny, or I just like this because I have an emotional attachment to it. There was one of the best things for us to do was to always tap into the comedy and to the shows, though, because whenever we made the two disparate connections between their life and the show, which was sometimes easy and sometimes hard, it always worked. Like there was never a case where it didn't work, because it was doing so many things at once. It was serious, it was funny, it was emotional, and it was them. It's like these two beautiful people at their height. Like it was just, they're like the hottest couple. So it's like you want to see them together on that show. But Naomi's right. There's a handful of things that could have easily been in there that would have been memorable for people. But this is kind of the reason why I love doing the film form as opposed to, say, a series, is that you have to be really critical on what you keep. You know, every frame counts, and I think that's a good way to go about storytelling, to make sure that you're not just inflating it for the sake of 3 episodes. And it might be a controversial thing with other shows, but I feel it when I watch some series.
Mm-hmm. And you know, of course, these are two beautiful people in love in a very complex way. And they're very complex people by themselves, and they're not with us. So how do you know, what are the challenges? And, you know, anyone can jump in here. What are the challenges of making a film about people who are not around to A, defend themselves, and B, make it in a way that respects them without making them out to be gods?
I think it's just that. I think you have to remind people that they're human. I think we had the unusual task of, instead of teaching people about a world they didn't know about and people they hadn't heard about, we had a different task, which was to take what were eventually, you know, what became Halloween costumes, you know, very flat, one-dimensional icons that were on keychains in Times Square, make them people. Because the character of Lucy and Ricky are different than Lucille and Desi. And I think the more you make them human, you make them flawed humans with complicated intention and ambition and relationship, and you try your best, I think, to tell the truth. You also, as you know, a documentary and the director has a high, it has I was going to say a hard job, but I think it actually has a very high honor, which is that they figure out in which to enter a story. And there's just a lot of responsibility there. So we took it seriously because we wanted to try to tell the story that was true, I guess, would be probably the thing we were searching for the most.
What Amy did so brilliantly was showing the hard work that, you know, this effortless comedy has. That Lucy rehearsed and rehearsed and rehearsed. Later, you know, in her other shows that Desi produced with her, she, you know, we found footage where, you know, she was saying, "Look, I'm not a lighting technician. I'm not the director here, but you know, there is something going on with this overhead lighting." And it was very, you know, Amy highlighted these, you know, difficulties that a woman has in that world, and especially, you know, more so then than now, but you know, it's not so great. But it is highlighting, the point is highlighting the hard work it took to create such effortless, funny, fun comedy, and you know, that was important.
And I think just having access, which Amy alluded to earlier, to Lucy's personal recordings, you know, home movie footage, these kind of films really benefit when you've got the subject being able to tell their own story. And one of the things that I know was important to Amy and Jeanne early on was, you know, other voices that we were going to inevitably bring into the movie. Let's really lean into people that have a direct connection, either because they knew them or they were directly influenced by the two of them. And so when you see Carol Burnett and you see, you know, Bette Midler and Norman Lear, for example, they're there because they knew them, because they saw them and they were influenced by them. So it's firsthand accounts, as opposed to, you know, other types of films or projects where, you know, you could have gone the route of having every famous comedian today talking about how great they were. And that would have been a version of it. But to really get that personal story makes both Lucy and Desi three-dimensional, makes them real. And even, you know, seeing that home movie footage, it's so revealing, even almost what's not said, just their body language, the way that they chose to be, you know, on their off days when there was a camera on them. That also said so much. Just if a camera dropped into any of our lives right now, you know, it's not necessarily all just happy times. You get to see what was really going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, I think one other big asset we had was Lucy and Desi Jr. I mean, a lot of times in these films that are authorized biographies, there are times when the people who are sort of the gatekeepers to those stories want to steer you away from maybe things that don't speak so highly, and that wasn't the case. I mean, I don't know how they do it, but they're incredibly honest about everything. They have a great vantage point of you know, just wanting to tell the truth. I think they've been in their parents' lives in a very unique way. I mean, they worked with them. They were their sons, their daughters. I'm sure they were, you know, friends as much as that as well. So it's very interesting and unique for this film because, anybody on Twitter or anything that says, "Why didn't you go there? Did Lucy stop you?" Or you can stop right there because it's not true. I mean, I think she was a huge asset as well as Desi in allowing us to tell the true story.
Thank you. I know you're at time, but you know, I have so many more questions and I could go on talking about this, you know, very, like I said, you know, that there's this very elemental idea of joy that Lucy and Desi bring to our lives, and they have brought to our lives for years. And that's what this film does as well, and which is so important at a time like this. You know, I get documentaries that talk about how badly our world is doing, because it is, but it's also so nice to see something like this and reflect on a past that was so joyful. So thank you to each one of you. Thank you to our very generous friends at Amazon Prime Video for sharing this with us. And thank you for all of you for joining us today. And if you want to watch the film again and again and again, it is on Amazon Prime Video. And so have a great rest of your day. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vedatri. A pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.